Hello, thank you everyone for joining. I am so happy to see a lot of names that I already know, but also to see new joiners. So welcome everyone. My name is Maria. I'm one of the conservation officers here in the DDCR, in the Dubai Desert Conservation Reserve. And just a little bit of an introduction before we jump into the webinar. The DDCR is the first national park that was established in 2003. And we basically have 225 square kilometers of protected land for native species of animals and plants to live and to find their resources. So we have all native species of plants. People will think that the desert is barren and empty. Not at all. There's so many things out there. Maybe not this year that didn't rain that much. But yeah, we have so many things. We have the iconic Arabian oryx. We have gazelles. We have snakes, geckos. There are so many things that would naturally be living in the desert in UAE. So we are very happy to have this little patch, which is not that little. It's like 5% of Dubai. So yeah, last year we started a series of webinars. So we had some researchers that did their projects in the DDCR. And this year we wanted to expand a little bit and also have some people that are just either researchers in other topics or enthusiastic about the nature in UAE. So with the occasion of the World Migratory Birthday, which was a couple of weeks ago, the 10th of May, we decided to invite a very special host. We have here Ahmed Alali, and he will talk today about migratory birds in the UAE. So when he's done, you have the chat and you can ask the questions that you need. So Ahmed, all yours.
Thank you, Maria, and thanks for the DDCR for this opportunity. I mean, the webinar series that you have established is amazing. The goal here is to raise awareness for everyone. A lot of people who work on this condition and work on these fields know a lot already. But what you are trying to do is to push this information or to push those information and to raise the awareness through a larger or a wider scope of audience. This is amazing, and I think it's one of the best practices that you can have here in the UAE to push all the information that you can have for everyone to fall in love with environment and to conservation. So if you don't mind, we'll start. I'll stop my camera and I'll try to share the screen. Okay, so please let me know if you see the screen.
Yes, I can see, but now I cannot see you.
Yeah, I stopped the camera. Do you want to see me? I'll open the camera. I don't mind it.
Yes, of course.
All right. To begin with, this presentation is about bird migration, specifically in UAE. I try to keep it general with a lot of basic information in the beginning and a few specified information at the very end about birds migration in UAE or migrant birds in UAE. My name is Ahmed Al-Ali. Okay, my name is Ahmed Al-Ali. I have a master's degree in environmental science from UAE University. I've been doing ornithology and bird watching for a very long time. I might be one of the very first UAE nationals to do so. I am a proud member of Emirates Birds Records Committee, EBRC. You can find their website there. They have a lot of information about the committee and birding in UAE. The committee have been established long way ago by our beloved Simon Aspinall and followed by Tommy Pedersen, and now we have our chairman Oscar Campbell and the members in the committee. I am one of the non-voting member. I manage all the records for OSMI, the Ornithological Society of Middle East and Central Asia and Caucasus, especially the segment of around the region by collecting all the data and formalizing all the literature. I'm also a record reviewer in a citizen science project, which is eBird. eBird is a website built on citizen science concept to collect all the birdwatcher data and to build all these maps and frequencies and etc. So recently I've joined the record reviewers team. Right now in UAE we have 4 persons or 4 people who review the records. And I've been using eBird since 2000, I think, 12 or something. It's a long time ago. I don't feel old at all. I'm also an award-winning bird and underwater photographer. I have more than 19 international award in birds and underwater photography. I mainly focus on UAE. This is a very brief introduction about myself. If you have any more questions, you can ask later. But don't about me, please. Ask about birds. Okay, what we'll talk about, birds. Everyone knows how birds are unique creatures. All the evidence show that they are the descendants or the descendants of dinosaurs. So they come from their dinosaurs ancestors through the evolution. There are a lot of evidence scientifically to support that, especially on the structure of the birds and structure on that can be found on the fossils of dinosaurs. There are a lot of things. I'll mention very few things just to see how evolution works and how science connect these bits and pieces of data to the modern age birds and how they can build up the hypothesis that they are evolved from dinosaurs. One of the things is bones. This image show you the difference between human bone and bird bone. We all know, or most of us know, the bird bone are very light. And the reason that they are light is because they are hollow. They have a very large mesh or air pockets inside them. It makes the bone sturdy but very light. Some birds weigh with all the bones and flesh and feathers by grams. They can like 5 grams, 10 grams, 15 grams. They are very light. This living creature is very light, and most of this lightness comes from their bone, from their hollow bone. Again, in all the fossils, on most of the fossils of dinosaurs, especially the dinosaurs that appear to be having wings and might have been flying back then, the fossil evidence shows that also dinosaurs might have hollow bones. Nothing else have hollow bones here in modern age than birds, and this is a good connecting point. Another thing is the wishbone. Most of you might know this. A lot of cultures have built traditions on this. Only records of animals or any living thing have a wishbone is birds on the modern age and the fossil records of dinosaurs. So they both share this bone. None other living creature have the wishbone. So this is again a very good connecting point between birds and dinosaurs. One other thing is feathers. Recent fossil records shows that some dinosaurs might have feathers. Especially in the recent years, with a lot of technology now, they can identify the width or the shape or the thickness of these feathers on the dinosaurs. And what other thing that have feathers on the modern age but birds? Also, let's go back. So basically, there is a lot of things. Some of them maybe more than there are a lot more than the things that we discussed. For example, the shape of the body, the claws, the 3 fingers with the claws. Much more details can be found on the internet if you try to search about how birds might have evolved from dinosaurs, from free-flying dinosaurs back in the days. So what we are looking right now when we are looking at birds right now, we are looking at descendant of a very ancient creature that one day have roamed around Earth. Now, another thing that birds are unique for is their ecological importance. You can see in the presentation we have 4 points here. These are the major importance the major points of importance for birds. There are more, of course, but these are the main characteristics that we can find on how important birds are for our environment. One of the things, pollination. You've seen this photo. I've clicked on it just now. This hummingbird, this amazing hummingbird, hummingbirds are nectarivorous. Some birds feed on nectar from flowers. So most birds that feed on nectar from flowers participate on all the ecology system by moving or sharing or dispersing these pollens from one flower to another, because when they feed on the flower, they might carry some parts of this pollen either on their beak, on their head, maybe feather, maybe feet. They carry these pollens to another flower, and they help with the germination, help with the dispersal of these pollens, which helps in ecology after all. Some other birds feed on fruits. And we call them, I forgot the term. Now, the birds that feed on fruits help with seed dispersal. Frugivores, I think. Frugivores are birds that feed on fruits. Now, whenever a bird feeds on fruit, seeds are hard-shelled usually, so it doesn't get digested. But the birds move from one place to another. So whenever the bird moves from place to another, these seeds come out with their bird droppings, and they help with spreading out all these seeds through the entire area that they move around, which helps ecology in some way or another by spreading the seeds somehow. So they are also considered as seed dispersers, a very good seed dispersers. Also, a lot of them are one way of another nature pest control. Birds who feed on insects called insectivores, and they feed primarily on insects. Now, the main thing that these birds do is create a balance. They feed on some insects that might be harmful for human cultivation. So if a farmer has a very large farmland, grasshopper, for example, an excess number of grasshopper might ruin the crops. Just the excess number, the large number of grasshoppers might ruin the crops. So birds come here in reducing the amount of, for example, the pesticide that farmer can use, because they get rid of these pests in a number. They create the balance. Just remember that how nature is perfect, that it preserve or the survival rate for good insects that can, for example, camouflage well or hide well in some areas, they won't be eaten. It's only the weak genetically that they couldn't hide well or they couldn't form a very good camouflage, they would be eating. So this is also one nature way of getting rid of a very weak genetic individuals. And the strongest, the survival of the fittest or the best. So the strongest genetic in insects, for example, they will be the best in hiding and best in surviving and avoiding these birds. So it's a balance between the birds and the insects. But again, recent studies shows that they save a lot on human in terms of using chemicals and in terms of wasting fund on some pesticides or some eradication project for the insects. So they create the balance that they were intended to do. Also, birds are bioindicator, and everyone knows this example. Bioindicator is whenever an individual or an organism, or for example, let's say here, bird, can be very much linked in the whole cycle or life cycle or the food chain, that these birds can be indicating how healthy is the environment. This example is a typical example. Barn owls. Barn owls feeds on a large number of rats. They eradicate the rats in some managed way. Now, there is an estimation that one barn owl could feed annually on like 10,000 or maybe 15,000 rat annually. So they really try to balance the things out. However, because barn owl feed on rats live on crops and on sands and on some areas, the availability of birds might indicate that the food chain is complete and might indicate that there is no missing points between the very basic foundation of environment and the apex predators or the top chain predator in birds, let's say, for example. The similar thing happens in oceanography and in the sea, with insects, for example. Like in the sea, if you find shark in the water, it means that the whole chain, or the whole food chain, is healthy, all the way from the corals, which is the very basic organism in the marine life, all the way to the apex predators or the main predators on this chain. So they are considered as bioindicators. So in a farm, finding a barn owl in a farm means that everything is almost perfect and almost reaching to the way that it's healthy. The rats have their food, which is involving also agriculture and vegetation and soil. And bear in mind that, for example, if you don't find the barn owl or you find dead barn owl poisoned, it means that there are poison maybe on the crops or pesticides in the area. So they give you an indication if there is a problem. So in one incident, if you find a barn owl in a farm dead by poison, it means that there is poison somehow across the way or across the chain of food. So they give you an indication that you have a problem and you need to act on it. This is, of course, interaction between the wildlife and the human life. So we consider them as bioindicators. Now, researchers and scientists keep searching in these and looking at how all these birds play what role on this food chain and where do they fall off on this food chain. Other raptors might feed on birds, so the availability on prey also might indicate that raptors might be there, and raptors might indicate that prey is there and prey is feeding on vegetation, etc., 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 if you follow the chain of the food. Now, birds are also very diverse internationally. There are more than 11,000 species of birds worldwide. Right here in UAE, we have 475, according to the latest statistics and records. This is very significant. This is almost like 3 point something or 4%, 4 point something percent of the worldwide population. It's considered almost as significant as any statistical calculation. It's a large number of birds for such a small country, and this is something that we are proud for. UAE, of course, has very diverse habitats. If you move from one coast to other coast, like from Dubai or Sharjah all the way to Fujairah or Khorfakan, for example, you'll be passing by a tremendous number of habitats. And every habitat is unique by its bird loving. So birds prefer some habitats. In the mountains, you can find some mountain birds. You will not find them by the shoreline. And waders, you will not find them in the desert, for example. Gravel plain have some specific birds that loves gravel plain only. So the diversity of the habitats may be taking a part here on how much birds we have in the UAE. But apart from that, most of the birds, just as information, most of the birds in UAE are migrant birds. The minority are local resident birds. We have maybe less than 100. And the majority of birds here are migrants. And this is where things become interesting, because migration changes from one year to another and changes from one habitat to another. And finding these migrant birds is challenging. However, it's also rewarding, and you will love it if you do it. So bird status. How do we categorize birds here, or maybe generally even? Birds are in general either resident or migrant. So if a bird is classified as a resident, there are some criteria to judge on that. Other birds might be classified as migrants. And here in UAE, we, and maybe most of our ornithology agree on this, migrants might be subcategorized or split also into two categories or two level. We've got visitors and migrant, or we call them passage migrants. So all birds are migrants. However, some birds might be classified as visitors and some birds classified as migrant. Now, how do we do this, or what are the criteria that we judge on these birds or evaluate these birds? You can find it here. Now, if you look at resident birds, for example, and the criteria on the left, we've got criteria like life cycle, living space, moving distance, moving routes, like what drive the birds to move, and how much are they available in the area. Now, resident birds, for example, they breed and they spend the whole life in one area. Now, when we speak about area, bear in mind it's not like only DDCR or the conservation area. It's a sometimes it's a country, sometimes it's an emirate, for example, or it's a part of an emirate. Sometimes it's a region. For example, maybe Oman, UAE, Qatar, and Bahrain, and part of Saudi. That might be considered as an area. Now, other factors weigh in or participate in how to evaluate a resident birds, but they primarily live, breed, or live their whole life in one area. Now, migrants are the opposite. Migrants breed in one area, but they spend 1 or 2 seasons away from that area. And mostly they would spend winter or summer in another area than the original area that they hatched from. So, for example, if a bird from Central Asia hatched from an egg, it lived its life until it reached winter, for example, it will have to move to another area. Sometimes it doesn't bear the harsh weather of the winter in Central Asia. Sometimes it follows food. There are other factors that we'll discuss later, but they breed in one area and they spend winter or summer in a different area. And the movement here is migration to an extent. So one example also, I'll show you a picture of an example. Everyone loves crested lark in UAE. Crested larks are resident in UAE. So these falls in within this category, resident. So they breed and they spend their whole life in UAE, for example, with minor movements. For example, a bird from DDCR or a crested lark from DDCR might be found in adjacent area like Al-Faya, or maybe it'll move to Al-Marmoom, for example. These are adjacent, similar habitat areas that might vary sometimes in food, for example. So it'll follow food, but it will stay within this area. You'll find it in winter, you'll find it in spring, you'll find it in summer, you'll find it even in autumn. The whole year we have this. Moving distance is another thing or another factor or criteria that we judge on how birds are residents or migrants. With residents, they can hardly be any movement. They are almost always sedentary. Minor movements or small movements are there just to follow some things. But with migrant birds, the distance is long. I mean, sometimes it reaches to thousands of kilometers. They travel all these distance from one place or the breeding place or breeding ground to their wintering or summer ground. So they travel much more longer areas. Moving routes also, one thing that scientists cautiously approach is how predicted and how frequent those routes are. For a bird to be a migrant, it needs to follow expected or speculated or predicted routes on specific times. So if a birds move randomly, that can't be considered as a migration route. But if a birds move through these lines or these routes from summer to winter and comes back from winter to summer, for example, these can be like predicted routes or almost fixed route that the birds follows. These can take a part on how migrant is this bird or resident. Also the moving drive. Now residents, because they don't move, it's almost there's no drive that makes them move. Crested lark, for example, it can tolerate the summer heat and the winter cold. It doesn't get any too much cold here, but heat is much. But it can bear both, so it can live in winter and summer. The only thing that might influence its move with this minor movement may be food. For some reason, insects might not be available in this area. It'll move like 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers to another area, or a little bit more, a little bit less to follow food, but it'll go back. It's still within the same area. But with migrants, there are two major drives for the birds to migrate. One of them is food. The other one is climate. And they are both related. Sometimes, for example, climate influence how food is available. So the change in climate between the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere, or between the different within the different region within a continent, might influence how food is available and might drive birds to migrate from one area to another. And the availability, and this is where we can split a migrant if it's a passage migrant or a visitor, regardless if it's in winter or summer, because we get some winter visitors and we get some summer visitors. Winter visitors means that birds visit us or migrate to our area in winter, and summer visitors are the birds that can be found as migrants in summer. So the availability with residents, it's always there. But with migrants, passage migrants, they can only be found in migration season. Now, the two major migration seasons are autumn migration and spring migration. And this is where climate shift between the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere, where summer becomes winter and winter becomes summer, gradually, of course. And these are the seasons where we can find birds escape sometimes the very harsh cold weather on the northern hemisphere and go to lower areas or closer to the equator, just to find the environment or the climate that suits them well. Or if that climate influenced the food, they would follow the food accordingly to these areas that might be a little bit warmer, for example, in winter. And with summer, again, because of the shift, some might run away from these cold weathers on the southern hemisphere and approach us whenever it's summer on us. An example of migrant birds, I'll show you the difference. I'll give you two examples, one of passage migrant and one of a visitor. The northern wheatear. Northern wheatear breeds on on Central Asia and sometimes part of the North Russia, for example, or Scandinavian areas, and maybe Norway, Finland. These are very cold areas. So whenever this bird approaches winter, it migrates. However, it doesn't stop here in UAE. It migrates to Central Africa. So within its journey from the North Asia continent all the way to Central Africa, it passes by UAE, so it doesn't stay over, and that's why it's considered as a passage migrant. Another example is the northern lapwing. Northern lapwing almost have the similar breeding range, so it breeds in Central and North Asia, and of course, Eurasia, which is Northern Europe or East Northern Europe. But whenever winter comes, it flies or migrates all the way to the Middle East and to some parts of Africa as well. However, these birds might find, this flock might find UAE suitable for it, so it will stay the whole winter in UAE. And that's why we consider it as a visitor, a winter visitor. Some birds who travel across the Arabia to Africa will be migrant, and that's why we classify them as passage migrant and winter visitor. So a larger population might stay in winter, not like the northern wheatear. Northern wheatear doesn't prefer to stay over UAE. There might be some occasional reports, but it doesn't prefer to stay over in UAE. And that's why we only find it in autumn, whenever they migrate from North Asia and Europe to Africa, and on spring, whenever they are going back to their breeding ground. I hope this is clear. I'll show you another examples of course, afterward. By the end of the presentation, you'll see a lot of examples, not from the residents, but from migrant birds. Now, we also in EBRC, we evaluate the bird presence in the United Arab Emirates. When we say presence, we mean what's the percentage of their occurrence in the appropriate habitat across the year. And we have 6 classification here. We start from a very common birds. That's the bird that recorded more than 90% of any visit to appropriate habitat. So we only judge the bird by its presence in the appropriate habitat. We don't look, for example, for a wader bird from the shoreline in the desert and we say it's not there, it's not common. No, we go and look at its appropriate habitat. So wader birds are mostly associated with shoreline, and that's the habitat for it. Mountain birds, for example, they can only be found in the mountain areas. So we don't count how many visits that they were on the shoreline, absence these birds, but it's only on appropriate habitat. So if a bird recorded more than 90% of the visits to that appropriate habitat, we consider it as very common. If it's between 51% and 90%, we consider it as common. Fairly common is between 10% and 50%. And then we get into the very interested parts of observation is the uncommon, rare, and vagrant. Uncommon birds are recorded less than 10% in appropriate habitats. 10% is very low number, but yet it's 10%. I mean, it's a considerable percentage, and that's why it's uncommon. Rare, I'll start from vagrant first. Vagrant are the species that recorded 20 times or less. These are the extremely rare sightings of birds that extremely rarely visit UAE. So if we have a bird that recorded 20 times or less since EBRC started in the late 80s, we consider this bird as vagrant. And these migration or these birds are sometimes might be thought as random. So in 10 years, we might have 1 sightings, for example, or 2 sightings. Some birds might be found only once throughout the whole recording history of EBRC or Emirates Bird Record Committee. So these are the very, very rare birds that visited the area. Sometimes they might land here in the UAE because they are weak, but they were not intended to land here. Sometimes they misread the signals of their migration routes. We'll discuss the routes afterward. So they messed up their routes, for example, and instead of going through the Levant area, and they went from the Arabia's area, which is super rare, and this is like randomly. But any record of birds 20 times or less, we consider it vagrant. Rare when it's more than 20. However, it's not frequent much. So more than 20 times, but there might not be annual records. So not every year we might find 1 or 2. Sometimes maybe in 3 or 5 years we'll have 1. Sometimes in every 4 years we'll have like a couple, and then they will be absent in the following years. But it's more than 20, yet they don't reach the 10% of the uncommon category. So this is how we evaluate the bird presence, and we give them one of these evaluation according to the observation and records from everyone. Now, how do they migrate? How do birds migrate? This is a very, very interesting topic, and most of the researchers might still be working on some of these theories. Some of them have a very strong evidence on how accurate these theories are. Some of them are still on progress with these researchers, and they are still trying to learn more and more how do birds migrate, how do they find their way. They don't have a navigation, GPS navigation, for example, and they can hardly understand those. So how do they move? How do they migrate? How do they know exactly what path to follow? Some migrant birds here in UAE, we find them on the same farm or same area every year. And this is amazing. How can a small birds like that travel to the same area without any instructions? There must be instructions. There are some theories that support these instructions. One of them is magnetic navigation. Researchers believe that birds can see the magnetic shift between the North Pole and the South Pole, and they can see all these lines in somehow or some way. They can see the lines of the magnetic lines that between the North Pole and the South Pole. We sense these lines through instruments. Humans sense these lines through instruments. Now, birds might have that instruments biologically built in within their body. As human, we don't see this. It's only the instrument that can read the value, and we elaborate that value into something. But birds might have the ability to see the magnetic lines between the North Pole and South Pole, and this is how they travel north to south and south to north. However, moving east to west, some birds migrate from east to west, move partially from east to west. They don't fall within this theory. So another theory is there is astrological navigation. They can have landmarks astrologically, like the sun, the place of the sun, or the position of the sun, the position of the moon, maybe even the stars. They can follow these things to follow or to know their migration route. Pay in mind that most birds migrate through the night. It's only like large birds, large flock of birds migrate daylight, but most of the birds travel or migrate at night. Some factors that influence that is the heat or the excess effort of migration. It might put a lot of strain in daylight on that bird. If it's travel on daylight, it might like lose a lot of water from its body. The sun might raise its heat, etc., etc., etc. So most birds ideally will travel or migrate through the night, but some large birds travel or migrate on daylight. One of the theories also is olfactory navigation. Olfactory means they sense the smell, and this can be seen on seabirds or pelagic birds. These are the birds that they live the majority of their life in the sea. They don't approach land unless it's for breeding. One example, for example, is shearwaters or storm petrels. These are very small birds that they can smell the unpleasant, for us as a human, unpleasant smell for algae, for microfauna. These are the small organisms that live on the seawater or the surface of the ocean, and they feed on those. So they might follow the smell of these organisms moving around between the different water bodies, and they follow them as a navigation to migrate. Also, the genetic programming and social learnings. A lot of researchers and scientists say that birds are genetically programmed to migrate, and a lot of incidents or a lot of reports have been reported for birds that were kept in captivity, and then whenever they are rehabilitated and released in the wild, they follow the same regimen or the same routes of their other members in the group migration routes. So there must be some genetic factor that contribute to that. And also the social learning. Some birds take their offsprings with them on their migration route, or they migrate in groups, so they follow as a social learning mechanism the migration routes and to follow with the migration route later. Also, climate, environmental, and topological navigation. Some birds, it's believed that some birds also create landmarks for them. So, for example, follow the line or follow the shoreline. By the way, most of the birds, they hate migration overseas, so they try to cross over on straits and small water bodies. They try to follow the land, okay, usually most of the birds. Of course, this doesn't apply to the seabirds or the pelagic birds, but most of the birds only like create topological landmarks for them to understand where they are going and how to come back from that. These are some of the theories. If you just try to, if you are interested in reading in these theories, that might be a good homework for everyone to read on whatever theory that interests them the most. There are a lot of references online that you can refer to, preferably scientific references, and they can describe in details how do these theories or how do these navigation mechanism works and what birds might be following these theories. So I talked previously about the migration path, or we call them the flyways. Now, it's very important to understand where do these birds come from and where do they go to. Now, it's very much established that they spend their breeding grounds in an area and they spend winter or sometimes summer in another area. So we know where do they come from and where do they go. Now, adding this to other factors might help in aiding scientists to build a very robust flyway. By flyway, we mean it's a direction or a path where birds usually migrate from to. And this applies for most of the birds that live within that region. I'll show you the flyways in a moment. So how do scientists know that? They follow some methods to monitor where do birds come from and arrive to. One of the very old and very robust way of monitoring is ringing. And by ringing, we mean that most of the researcher put some rings on the bird feet as far as they are chicks and small, or sometimes when it's an incident of a captive bird or a captured bird, injured bird, for example, it might also be ringed and released back to the wild. Now, most of the people who do these projects, they keep a very good record of what bird have been ringed with what number, what year, where exactly. And they share these information online. So if, for example, a bird was ringed on Central Asia, in any area on Central Asia, I observed here in UAE, I tried to capture good photos of the birds, take all the information from the ring, and contact that person. He will tell me that his bird was ringed, for example, in this area, at this age, at this month. So you could build a path that the bird was there and appeared in UAE, though. So that might be a good path. Multiple record might create the route. So, for example, from Central Asia, maybe it went to the Levant and then it came back. This is not an acceptable route, but just an example. It went, for example, through Iraq and Turkey and maybe back to Saudi Arabia and maybe to the UAE. All these information might create a pathway. However, we can at the very end know birds come from where and they land where, or they migrate to where. This is a very old method. However, it's still active and it's still very robust, especially because it allows researchers to collect biological data as well. So it's not only ringing, but they can wait. How long is the bird? How heavy is it? Especially when it's chick. We got all these biological data that need to be fixed. Especially in cryptic species, some species might differ only in small, minor, like length or weight. It's hardly weight, it's mostly sizes or lengths. These information are valuable. So this method contributes also to other aspects of research in ornithology. The other method is satellite telemetry. And satellite telemetry is whenever we have a device that can be installed on a bird in a way that it doesn't obscure its movement or create an obstacle for him or make an injury for him or injure him, for example. Yet it contributes on sending signals to the satellite, and that researcher can see what's going on with the birds. And mostly it's live data. Some of the smaller birds might be fitted with a satellite or a telemetry device that can only be retrieved. The data can only be retrieved if we recapture the bird and take that device and read all the data. But these are special conditions for the very small birds. You might notice this in raptors, for example. Raptors are large birds, especially the large raptors, the eagles, the vultures, etc. So raptors can carry these devices. They are not heavy; they are very light. But a big bird like vulture or an eagle can carry this device comfortably. It might live with it maybe 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. It's easy for it, and it creates like a route or a map. Where is this bird's present? Where did it go to? If it's with a timestamp, for example, every day it will create like map if it's live data, and mostly it's like in a frequent time that the researchers get these data just to reduce the cost and etc. But it creates a very good sense on where did this bird went or follow, which path did it follow to move from point A to point B. And this is one of the new age technological advancements in bird monitoring. So by following these methods, organizations like few mentioned here, like BirdLife International, Ramsar, and sometimes the CMS, for example, Convention on Migratory Species, these organizations fund researchers who use these methods to monitor the birds' migration paths. But these are the organizations that have the majority of data that they can analyze, and they come up with flyways. I'll show you a map in a minute. This map that I'll show you is from BirdLife International. So from the tremendous and the huge amount of data that BirdLife International had access to, they built up from all these migrant birds some flyways, fixed flyways, if you can say, that they find birds migrate from to, in a sense of way. Now, the most important flyways for UAE is the Central Asian flyways and the African Eurasian flyways. You can see this green area and the orange area. So you would expect that a bird that lives in Central Asia or Northern Asia migrate to Southern Asia or the Middle East area here. And sometimes they might go all the way to Africa through the African Eurasian flyway. Sometimes birds from Eastern Europe, they would follow this path to go to Africa, Central or Eastern Africa. Sometimes it's the Mediterranean area. So these are the most important flyways that UAE falls within: the Central Asian flyway, African Eurasian flyway. It's rare, very rare, for a bird from East Asia, from Japan, for example, or Korea, to migrate to Africa. And that's from the East Asian Australian flyway. So most of the birds on East Asia can be found in Australia. So they take this migration route rather than this migration route. Now, what factors are there? There are a lot of factors, but birds that were monitored from this area mostly ended up in Australia or somewhere here. They rarely end up around here. And this is how researchers build an idea on what to expect, what birds to expect, what migration route is there, where did these birds come from. I think the last example, one of the examples later on migrant birds, is about a bird that lives across this region. And what we get in UAE is the birds that live in Central Asia or North Russia. But the birds that live on Alaska or in East Asia goes all the way to Australia. This is one of the magnificent migrant birds. We'll talk about it later. So number of flyways are different. Every organization classify flyways according to its standards. Here there are 4. In some reference you'll find 7, some will talk about 8, some are break down into minor ones, some organization, some lump most of this, but there is a very strong evidence with the monitoring program that these are the proven flyways for all the migrant birds in the world.
Ahmed, we have less
Yes.
than 10 minutes, okay?
Oh my goodness.
I know it's super. But just to
Now,
let you know.
the importance of monitoring migrant birds is to coordinate international efforts for bird conservation and also to protect the critical habitat. Most of the birds are endangered due to habitat loss. The minority is endangered to hunting. I'm not saying that hunting is not there and it's not creating a huge impact, but habitat loss is the major threat to birds, to migrant birds. So monitoring the birds and knowing where it is from and where it is going to might aid in how to protect these birds on a breeding ground and on a migration route. Also, there is a huge effort internationally to standardize the tracking and data sampling methods because the researcher, when they combine large number of data, if the sampling method is different, they cannot combine that data to get a better understanding. They have only work on the similar sampling method, similar data sampling method. And sometimes that creates a barrier on having much larger sample size, which create much accurate finding or results. So the lower the sample size, the weaker the results are, and the larger sample size create a very robust and more accurate data understanding. And also to address global threats. Sometimes migrant birds might face different threats in different stages. So in a breeding ground, it might be habitat loss. They don't have the habitat to breed. But in migration routes, it's maybe pesticides. So different threats can be combined to understand what are the major threats. I'll give you one example here, which is the broad-billed sandpiper. This is an amazing bird. This bird, the orange color means breeding population. The blue color means wintering ground. So these birds breed on these grounds. See how fragmented and how low it is. It's a vulnerable birds, by the way. And in winter, it moves from these grounds to spend the area on these blue areas, to spend winter on these blue areas. And then whenever summer approaches, it goes back to breeding. Spring approaches, it goes back to breeding grounds so that it can breed on these grounds. So understanding this will help the bird on its breeding ground by protecting it in its wintering ground. Now, moving a little bit faster, I'll tell you about few migrant birds in the UAE. I'll try to make it short, hopefully within time. Now, one of the main or one of the interesting birds that's common, passage migrant. Now, focus on the classification, how frequent or what's the frequency of this bird, and what's its status. This is a passage migrant. Passage migrant, it means it doesn't stay in the UAE for a whole season. No, it moves on. These are the breeding grounds. The orange color are the breeding grounds, and the blue color are the wintering grounds for these birds. Now, birds, whiskered tern, move from the breeding ground to wintering ground. So it doesn't stay through winter in the UAE. However, when it's moved from here to here, it passes by UAE. And that's why we can only see it on migration season, on autumn migration and on spring's migration. Now, pay in mind, bird stays longer and with larger quantities on spring migration rather than autumn migration. There are few reasons for that. One of the main reasons that whenever they go back to their breeding ground, it's already spring in UAE. Weather is a little bit more pleasant than autumn. Autumn is once we are done with the summer, and it's a little bit more harsh than spring. So they prefer to pass by and spend more time in spring rather than on autumn. So in autumn, you find them like move very quickly through UAE, but in spring, they move a little bit slower and they spend more time. Another bird is white wagtail. This is a very popular bird, very common migrant and winter visitor. And notice that we said migrant and winter visitor. So it's a passage migrant and winter visitors. Why? Because throughout its breeding area, which is Asia, Central Asia and North Asia, example, and Eastern Europe, for example, it moves in winter to all these blue grounds like Indian subcontinent, Iran, Arabia, also Africa, North Africa, and Central Africa. So if a bird moves from Central Asia, for example, to Africa, it will be considered as a passage migrant in UAE. It will pass through UAE and go. But other birds will come to UAE and stand and hang over all through winter. So we consider them as migrant and winter visitors. And this is a nice way to understand how to differentiate between migrant and visitors. Greater spotted eagle. This is also one of the big birds. It's a common migrant and winter visitor. This bird breeds in Central Asia and East Asia sometimes, in Nepal and these areas. And whenever it moves these breeding areas in winter, it goes down a little bit for maybe a little bit warmer weather. Consider this is very harsh winter. Like these blue areas, especially in the Arabias, and it's considered as a winter visitor because it stays for winter and sometimes more than that. We have occasionally find some over-summered birds, and these might be the birds that might be injured or might be very weak to migrate back, and they can over-summer in the UAE. If they survive, they can regain their health, and maybe they can migrate on the following season. This is a very beloved bird for DDCR, Eurasian griffon vulture. Griffon vulture is a very tricky bird. It's vagrant and it's migrant. They are poorly understood or monitored, and there is very limited publication on the eastern population. So it's the population that falls within the eastern range of its occurrence. However, there's very good research on birds that live through Europe and how do they migrate to Africa, and some of the birds that live occupy Eastern Europe, and how do they move through Northern Arabia to pass to Africa. The birds that we get in UAE, and by the way, we only have like 18 record, maybe 20 record max of this bird in the UAE. They might be coming from the eastern population, the one that lives in Pakistan, maybe India or Central Asia, and then some of these areas. They migrate through the UAE, and that's why it's vagrant. There's a very limited number of records. DDCR have a very good records on those. Willow warbler. This is also another bird that's fascinating migrant. It migrates in Northern Asia, Asia and part of Europe. Notice how it extends all the way to Scandinavian here, like Norway and Finland and Sweden, etc. These are very cold areas. And when it's moved in winter, it goes to the wintering ground, which is Africa, Southern Africa, southern part of Africa, and central and southern part of Africa. And it passes by UAE as a passage migrant. So we only see it on rarely on autumn, but more frequently on spring. And that's why it's fairly common migrant, so it doesn't stay over here. By the way, this bird is only 12 centimeter long, and it's only 14 gram. So imagine a bird that's 14 gram moves all these distances. It's more than 5,000 kilometers, maybe 10,000 kilometers. It's a huge or very long migration route. One of the summer visitors here in UAE is the sooty shearwater. This is a pelagic bird, can be found only on the oceans. It rarely approaches land mass unless it's for breeding. And in UAE, the only reports are in summer. So it's a rare summer visitor. And it breeds on the very end of these, like southern Australia and on these areas. But it moves up on summer. Now, because it's very rare, there are very limited number of records on these regions. And upon compiling more records, maps can be updated accordingly, but it might not be as frequent. This is where we talked about how predictable and how frequent these migration routes. So we don't get sooty shearwater every year. However, we might get a couple every following years, but they are not sturdy. They are not every year we get this route or these numbers. And that's why it's not fixed. It's not predictable, and it's not like can be predicted for some reason or can be known in other way. Now, bar-tailed godwit, this is the last slide, Maria. Bartel Gadwit is the hero of migration. It's common passage migrant and winter visitor. And look at its range. It only breed on the northern part of Asia. These are very cold areas. And Alaska, of course, don't ignore this area. Now, why is it the hero of migrant birds? Because it might carry the longest migration route over water. Now, what we get here in the UAE, because we get this as common, passage migrant and winter visitor. Some birds stays for winter. Some birds, the birds that moves for southern Arabia and Africa, will pass by UAE. Otherwise, they will stay for the whole winter in UAE. What we get in UAE is the population that comes from these areas. However, monitoring project proved that the population in Alaska and in some of these areas migrate all the way to Australia. Now, this is very tricky because this is a huge body of water, the Pacific Ocean. Now, they move from these areas to Australia it's like 15 or 14,000 kilometers in 9 days. One flight. They don't land. They take off from Alaska and they land on Australia in 9 days, continuous flight. It's more than 10,000 kilometers, maybe 14, 15,000 kilometers. This is amazing migration route. All over water, though most birds don't like flying over water, but that's their migration route. That's why it might be the hero of migration. When it comes back, it doesn't come back the same way because weather is a little bit pleasant. It stops along the way until reach Alaska. But going from their breeding ground to their wintering ground, it's one flight continuous in 9 days. That's amazing for such bird. With that, I conclude. And hopefully I've been giving some good information. Hopefully everyone have understood something about migration. And I'll leave it back to you for questions, Maria.
Well, thank you so much. It is very interesting, and definitely, I think that 1 hour it's not enough to talk about birds and migration. Just starting from the theories and how they migrate and how they orientate themselves, it's just awesome. And then cases like this last one that it's like in 9 days, all in one. It's awesome. So yeah,
It's a
thank
very
you.
interesting topic, migration specifically. And if you give me 10 hours, I will not stop.
Well, we can always organize another one. I think there are more days for birds in like World Bird Day or something like that. So I will be sure to send you an invitation. But yeah, no, it is very interesting. Do you, because you were talking before a little bit about the eBird, um, do you want people to maybe like post their pictures so you can have more records? Because sometimes, and I am one of them that I barely put the pictures online. So, for example, about the griffon, we do have a lot of sightings in the DDCR. Actually, last month I think we saw two in the camera traps, but we don't really post them anywhere. So, just for people like me
Yes,
that don't share
yes.
our data.
Now, most of the data are built on. Now, don't forget that there's a huge part of bird science comes from the birds enthusiast and hobbyist. Bird watching is very common and popular hobby across worldwide or all over the world. Now, whenever there are data sharing is caring. Some data that can be shared to the citizen science project. Citizen science projects means that scientists are not necessarily the focal point. People can have their own science project. So eBird is a citizen science project. It's open for public. Everyone can have an account and everyone can go out, watch birds, or if he's a bird watcher, can put his data in. It's good for him to have his records in one spot. So he can come back to these records. He remember where did he saw what, and for other people also to know what's in the area. researchers use these data to build up pathways or flyways, or to understand the community of birds. What are the percentage of migrant birds or resident birds? Is this bird occurred only in one season, and when exactly, which week, blah, blah, blah. There is a lot of data can be done like that. So it's very useful to join one of these citizen science projects. There are a lot. The most popular one is eBird. It's a very robust, it's built on a very robust database, and it has collaboration and funding with a lot of international organizations like BirdLife, like Birds of the World, the some audio and video and photo library as well, electronic library share into that, Cornell Library of Ornithology. There are a lot of organizations that contribute to eBird. It might be the best so far. Other projects are there, like iNaturalist, or applications that can be found across wide the electronic media or internet. You have to choose. We recommend eBird because UAE database is on eBird after all, and everyone can have a look at them. So it might be a good way for everyone to share his data through eBird, so that EBRC can look at those and evaluate them. We have a good reference with images, with audio recording, etc., etc., etc.
Okay, thank you. So I will start from tomorrow sharing. Please, everyone, if we have any other photographers here in the group or someone that has any pictures of birds, please share it so we can all use it. There is a couple of questions. I have one that says, what is the most expensive and unique breed present in the DDCR? It's not a zoo, so we don't purchase the animals. So I don't know what's the most expensive. All of them are invaluable, so I cannot so I cannot really say. Yeah, it's not like a zoo or anything like that. Like the animals were either living there or came by themselves, or we received them through like translocations and conservation projects, but there is no buying or like, yeah. So there is another one that says, do you do any photography events so we can join Birdwatch? In the DDCR for now, we are not doing anything like that. We have other volunteer activities, but maybe Ahmed, from your side, I know I'm in the bird group, so I know that there are tours for birders.
I honestly don't do photography events. Some of the events that I make are bird watching events. So it's mostly for bird watchers and some of the researchers that might be interested in looking at some specific birds. With photography, it's very tricky because bird photography is a sensitive type of photography. I cannot take a group, for example. Birds are very skittish. Some birds are scared from a from a distance, for example. So taking a group, it's not ideal for my type of photography. I'm more into documentary, and sometimes it's more of the art of photography rather than the documentation. So on both situations, large group are not ideal. I haven't done this. Maybe I do this in the future, maybe also in collaboration with DDCR, who knows?
Of
But in
course, yeah.
spring, not in summer also.
Yeah, definitely no. But anyway, anyone can go and watch birds. There are so many guides out there, so many books. So Ahmed, I'm sure that I also invite you to just go out, any forested area, like if you go to Mustre Park or and just walking, you can see so many things. So if you go with your guide and maybe you don't even need a fancy camera, just like binoculars or just watching with your eyes, and the amount of things that you can see, it's amazing. So yeah, you can start for the beginners, you can start just from that and then go more and more. And then join Ahmed, maybe sometime.
Maybe one day if I'm available.
There is someone that is saying that never heard about the climate and environmental navigation, that theory. If you know any birds that in particular use that clue.
No, no, I can't think of a specific bird, but think of seed eaters, for example. Now, seed eaters, because plants that grow seed or crops that grow these type of seeds depend primarily on climate. So mostly on springs or on some cool weather. So for example, in Europe, it can be grown in winter. But in UAE, it's grown in winter because the climate is optimal for these crops. Now, this is where climate affect food, and the birds in this situation, they follow the food. It's not necessarily the climate. They might be adjusted to colder weather. Uh, if they don't prefer it, they would go to a warmer area. But this is most specifically connected with food. So food is a very primary urge for birds. They need to eat. So they follow the food, and food is influenced by climate. So it's a win-win situation between climate and food and how they interact and affect the birds. It's like that. Unless it's primarily weather, and that can be done only on specific monitoring program. I can't remember anything right now on specific birds, but think about how climate affects food and how food affects the movement of the birds.
Yeah, of course, it's everything is linked. So I think that for now there are no other questions. I'm going to leave my email there. So if anyone wants to know anything in particular, you can email me and then I will ask Ahmed. Thank you very much again. It's been awesome, and in this topic we could go on and on and on for hours. So yeah, maybe that's our signal that we just need to organize another webinar. Yeah.
No problem. Thank you very much. It was very pleasant. I hope everyone got a home message with him or some information that he can take away from him. Send all your further questions to Maria and she will forward them to me. Also, you can follow me on Instagram. I'll write my handle in the chat box. Ask me directly if you want. I'm happy to share all information about birds and to share this very enthusiastic hobby with everyone that's interested in.
Awesome. Yes, please write it there. Anyway, I will probably share in our Instagram account a picture of the event or a short video, and I will tag Ahmed. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone, and I hope to see you, all of you, maybe in another webinar with Ahmed or any other topic.
Thank you very much, Maria, for organizing things. And thanks again for DDCR for this opportunity to spread the words and to share all my information and knowledge. And thanks to everyone. I see a lot of thank you in the comment section. Thanks to everyone that's been here with us today.
Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone.